hitting the record button. Right. Okay. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this ODLAA webinar, which is the first of our monthly webinar series for 2022. In case you're not aware, ODLAA is the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia, and it's an international professional association, as it's described there on the slide. And the people who belong to ODLAA or who are interested in ODLAA work-related, the sort of thing that ODLAA does, they're all dedicated to the advancement of research practice and support of education that happens across space and time. One of the star attractions of ODLAA is its journal called Distance Education. Indeed, if you didn't realise it, we are very honoured to have the editor-in-chief of the journal here with us today, Som Naidu. So it's great to have you here, Som. Many of the topics of our webinar series this year will be presented by authors who have published in recent issues of the journal. And that's exactly the case for today's webinar. I would like to introduce you to the authors of a really interesting article that was published in the November 2021 issue. So welcome Veselina Lambrev and Barbara Cruz from the University of South Florida. Their article is called Becoming Scholarly Practitioners, Creating Community in Online Professional Doctoral Education. The article for me is particularly interesting because it reports a study that draws in a number of themes and ideas that are very dear to many distance educators' hearts. The development of scholarly practice through communities of inquiries, and in this instance, it's in the context of doctoral education. I'm now going to hand over to Veselina and Barbara to lead you through their presentation. Please feel free to add your comments or questions to the chat as we go along. We'll make sure that we attend to any of those as we go along. And I know Veselina and Barbara are going to schedule in time for discussion and for questions during the session. So over to you, Veselina and Barbara.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome to all of our colleagues. I am not a digital native, as they say, because I started my professional life in education 37 years ago now. So I am just tickled pink that we are able to connect with colleagues literally across the span of the globe. And we are coming here today together in our mutual interest and love for our profession. My name is Barbara Cruz, and along with my colleague Veselina Lambrev from the University of South Florida, we teach in educational, in EDD program, a professional education doctoral program, where we hold dear the idea of building a community of scholarly practitioners. And so today we're going to share the highlights from the work that Sarah just discussed and invite you to share some of the insights and wisdoms that you have gathered in your own practice. So I'm going to hand things over to Veselina, who is going to give us an overview of today's agenda, as well as an overview of our evaluative study.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everyone. Very nice to spend this part of the evening with all of you. We're very thankful for the invitation and really thrilled to chat with you after our short presentation about your experience as well. So we planned for a brief presentation, and that's the outline that we have in mind for today. We are going to first briefly introduce the University of South Florida EDD program, just to give you a context of where our study was situated. We will provide an overview of the study. We'll share with you some key takeaways from this learning. And we hope to have some small group discussion or a whole group discussion we'll see at the end, so that we can exchange ideas about online learning in professional education. the professional education doctorate. So briefly about our EDD program, it's called an EDD in Educational Program Development, and the emphasis of the program is on educational innovation. It's a professional practice education program. We also have a PhD program in the College of Education with various strands, but our program is specifically professional education doctorate. It's housed in the College of Education at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And as many professional doctoral programs, we follow a cohort model to take advantage of the cohort effect of supportive peers who are similarly engaged in their learning. We admit a cohort of students, new cohorts of students once per year, usually around 15 to 20 students per cohort. And our students have a really diverse background in terms of not just cultural and racial background, but also public and private school teachers, really very diverse professional background that they bring. We have administrators from public and private schools, educators, higher education professionals. So for instance, some of our students are also employees of the University of South Florida in various units of the university, also from the corporate world, and veterans and military connected professionals also are some of the population that our program attracts. The focus is on preparing graduates to create, launch, and evaluate promising innovations in their own professional settings. So really students are working throughout the program for about 3.5 years as part of the cohort on addressing a problem of practice in their own profession. And they can either create an innovation, they can conduct an innovation in their practice, or some of them decide to actually adopt an evaluative approach, depending on the nature of the problem of practice that they are examining for their dissertation. The program follows a blended delivery format, meaning that for regular semesters, fall and spring, we meet 5 Saturdays on campus. And this is usually for our required courses, but also for electives. And for the rest of the time during the semester, students work remotely with synchronous, asynchronous sessions. We encourage them to work with their friends and peers in the cohort. And there is also usually a summer course. So it's kind of an accelerated program, similar to the format that many professional programs actually take. One key feature that we believe is distinctive for our program is that dissertation is built into the curriculum. So rather than having students work on a series of courses, which is the traditional, as we know, doctoral education, and then at the end work on the dissertation, as professional practitioners who are very advanced in their field and who bring a really rich expertise with them, we'd like to start them working on a problem of practice for the dissertation in the very first semester. So they start in the first semester with addressing a problem of practice or several issues that they want to focus on, and later on they decide on which one will become the focus of their dissertation. And with each semester, we build components of the dissertation, either as major final projects or as small projects throughout the courses, so that they can advance and progress actually, and that at the end of the second year, they're pretty much ready with their dissertation proposal to hand it to their dissertation chair, work on it a little bit, defend, and start actually with their dissertation research and writing at the end. So as you can see from this format, the physical component is important for our program because we really try to enhance students' participation in group work, in work with cohort peers. We try to know our students very personally as well as professionally to be able to support them, because they work on problems of practice that they bring from their professional worlds. And as university faculty, we really need to find ways to connect with them, to get to know their the world that they're coming from, and to be able to support them so that they can develop their dissertation in practice and to become scholarly practitioners, so that they're able, when once graduated, to be able to address issues that come up in their practice. So
thank you, Veselina. Yeah, so with respect to our study, now you've gotten the kind of context from Veselina as to where we were coming from. Pre-COVID, the blended delivery system of having some face-to-face meetings, of having some online meetings, of having assignments that were in the field, of having independent work, all of these things together worked closely to promote learning and also to build community. But then, of course, the pandemic hit. Face-to-face meetings were eliminated. All of a sudden, we had to think about the pedagogies that we had developed and how we were going to adapt them to an online space. And just as importantly, some of the assignments that we gave our students had to also be rethought. So as you all know, in the United States anyway, everything kind of pretty much came to a screeching halt about mid-March 2020. For the rest of that spring semester, we were just kind of, treading water, trying to get through the end of the semester. But Veselina and I knew that that fall, starting in late August for us of 2020, we were going to have to teach the Practicum course. We were going to teach it together. And we knew that we were going to have to adapt our pedagogy, because we were not going to be going back to face-to-face. And we were going to have to think about how we were going to make some adjustments with our assignments in the course as well. And so as we worked over that summer, we started wondering what was going to be the perceived effect on the part of the students to these adaptations, and what would be the impact on their learning and on their sense of community in the classroom. Next slide, please. So the course that we taught that fall, in the fall of 2020, is called Practicum in Educational Innovation. They take it in their third semester of the program. So just to give you an idea, by the time that we get them in this course, they have considered theoretical frameworks. They have developed a literature review centered around their problem of practice. And they have also learned about and explored various research methodologies. So one of the main course objectives in the Practicum is to develop a pilot study to be able to apply all of the things that they've learned about, the theoretical frameworks, their literature review, to see what other people have done on this topic, those research methodologies, and actually try their hand at it. But you can imagine that all of a sudden, with the pandemic, all of a sudden, people who had been doing face-to-face interviews, they had to start using Zoom or Teams. People who had been doing observations in the field, they had to figure out a way of doing virtual observations instead. Perhaps they had done surveys or questionnaires, and now they needed to switch to a digital platform. So we really focused on the pilot study and the different kinds of things that the students were doing in the classroom, and how they were going to make these kinds of adjustments. So what were our guiding questions? First of all, were we able to provide spaces for community building in this online course? Were we able to cultivate a community of inquiry that really underscored the ethics of care and a researching practice? And if we found these things to be true, by what mechanisms did this happen? And so we looked at these questions through the lens of a community of inquiry model. And Vasilina is going to tell you a little bit more about that now.
So we chose the community of inquiry framework to examine our questions because it has shown promise for understanding the practice of online education. And because the theory actually understands virtual classrooms as socially constructed spaces where students and instructors collaborate together. And it also states that meaningful online education is dependent on the development of a community. So we're really interested in this idea about if we were able to develop this community of inquiry, what was the perceived effect of it? So we looked at these three elements that a community of inquiry framework talks about, namely the social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And so for the social presence, we were interested in the way the community talks about this ability of participants to project themselves as real people with authentic personal identity in the online community. So we were interested to find out if our participant students were able to perceive other people in the course, for instance, their instructors or their classmates as authentic people, and also how they were able to project their own identities as such. Cognitive presence is defined as the extent to which learners can construct and acquire knowledge. And this happens through a reflective engagement with the subject matter, through reflective engagement with peers and other learners, through a self-reflection, as well as through a higher critical discourse. So we theorized that from the perspectives of the EDD, achieving cognitive presence in the course should result in applying practitioner research with the end goal of enacting a positive social innovation. So to what extent students were talking, if at all, talking about the extent to which they were able to practice research methodologies, learn about these research methodologies, feel more confident probably, or needing something else to support their learning. And the third construct, teaching presence, which is important and kind of overarching, has a primary importance because of its strong correlation with the perceived student learning and satisfaction. So having this theoretical framework in mind, we chose qualitative research methods for this study, and we designed a qualitative questionnaire based on the community of inquiry framework. We chose the qualitative methods because they really aligned with our goal to understand the constructed meaning that students develop in the course, to understand their experiences and perceptions. And on the other hand, the questionnaire was very useful because we were still online, so we could not meet in person. It was a helpful data collection instrument. And at the same time, it helped us navigate power imbalance in terms of some ethical considerations that we had in the course. So being the instructors of this course, and at the same time, actually developing this evaluative study with our own students prompted us to look for some collection methods, such as the online questionnaire that will keep our respondents confidential. The questionnaire had 18 questions. We first briefly introduced the community of inquiry framework because we knew that not all of our students knew what it was about. And basically the questions asked about the role of instructors in communicating class topics, objectives of the course, learning assignments, our role in facilitating collaborative activities, designing dialogues, and our role in the establishment of an overall sense of community. We were also very interested in this adapted pedagogies that we have implemented. So we asked students about their perceptions about the value of these assignments. So for instance, we asked them the critical friends group because we asked students throughout the course to work in small groups and to share feedback on their progress with critical friends. We asked them about the value of the biweekly reports because students were supposed to submit written reports bi-weekly about their progress, what they were doing as part of the pilot study. They were also required to give feedback to their critical friends on their bi-weekly reports. So these are the questions that related to social and cognitive presence, how social relationships were developed, and also questions about appropriate research methodologies, because one of the main actually aims of the course was to help students move to the dissertation stage a little bit more and to help them identify, test, and pilot some research methodologies. So on this slide, we are sharing some 5 key findings or takeaways from the study about humanizing the online learning space. We felt that the first key finding related to teacher presence, and this was based on data, the data that we collected with the students. So for instance, students talked about the instructor's role in establishing social presence, and that it was very important and maybe the one single most important factor in their satisfaction with the course. Second one relates to personal connections, and students talk about the relationships that they establish with peers, the relationships that they establish with us. A part of the data that was very interesting to us related to this humanizing of the learning space, this idea that when Barbara and I used, for instance, self-disclosure about our lives, we found out in the data that students really appreciated this. So for instance, sharing on the screen our homes, but also remember that this was time in fall of 2020 that was very kind of stressful for all of us. So very often we as instructors would also create spaces for students to share about what they were going through in their lives. We would share as well about ourselves. So we found in the data that this was very appreciated by the students and helped create these relationships and social presence. Our fourth finding relates to whole group discussions, and students were very satisfied with this curriculum element. They actually shared that the questions that we used and which were carefully crafted in the whole group discussions were evaluated as helpful for their learning. And this was not exactly the case with the small group collaboration. This is where students shared that small group collaboration was, for some of them, working well when they had group members who invested the same time and energy and followed deadlines on time. But because students were asked to meet with their small group members outside of class time, when we were not meeting as a whole group, sometimes these small group activities did not work as planned. And we have a data quote to share specifically on this. And our last finding was kind of unexpected, and it relates to student agency, because we found that students created collaborative learning spaces for themselves. They established weekly check-ins where they met outside of class. And we knew about these meetings. We were invited, not always participated. This was really a space that we did not create. This was entirely students' initiative, but students in the study talked about the value of this additional collaborative space for their learning. So we concluded that we should utilize and encourage more purposefully the supplemental forms of support for community building.
Thank you, Veselina. And, you know, to echo what Veselina just used, I love the expression, and it's hers. I told her, I think this is great, humanizing the online learning space. I think that if there are 3 takeaways that we would underscore for you, it would be these 3 that you see there on the left in bullets. The first thing is that as instructors, as curriculum designers, we have got to be very intentional and very purposeful in our course design. We have to be very clear that we value and we center collaboration and equity and ethics at the very core of our online learning community. We have to remember that learning can take many different shapes and forms. And at the very least, there's formal and informal. And as to echo what Veselina was just saying, yes, we created those safe spaces in the whole group discussions. And the students in their anonymous surveys, they said, I never felt like if I said a minority opinion that I was going to get shut down. I knew that I would be heard. But that also there was this informal learning that occurred. And so, but we were also instrumental in that. So that, for example, let's say that our class started at 9 o'clock in the morning, we would open up the class at around 8:30. And every time that we got on, Veselina, I'm sure that you remember this, the students had already been on there before we were. And they were holding up their dogs, and they were holding up infants, and they were asking each other how they were doing. And so being able to create those spaces and to facilitate that was really important. And then lastly, we found that the community of inquiry model is an excellent and effective model, not only to build community and to sustain it, but also to realize the very powerful learning. So powerful that Veselina is going to share with you some of the students' own words.
Sorry, I think I froze for a little bit. So we decided to share a few quotes from student data, just so you can hear their voices. For instance, one student said, all sessions engage conversations with the whole group, not just some students, and it was not just us receiving a lecture. A second comment is, you felt a sense of belonging, support, and being cared for in your cohort and program. And the third one relates to this idea of sharing. By sharing their own experiences, the instructors reinforced a sense of community, rapport, and trust. We really like this comment about us being human. The professors felt human. They made us feel like they were one of us. Their honesty made me trust them and work harder for them. And the last comment we wanted to share today was, although the experience, which was the critical friends group discussed here, was meant to be collaborative, the challenge with group work can become complicated if you have individuals who are not vested in completing the assignment at a higher level, or who choose to wait until the last minute to complete any associated work. So based on this, we of course reflected and analyzed the data and decided that we need to be more purposeful with asking students how to create and provide feedback to their critical friends peers. So this semester we're teaching the course again with another cohort of students, but further adapted and further modified the critical friends assignments so that we have more points of feedback, we have more contact with students. So hopefully this addresses the concern of some of the students in these groups.
And so what we'd like to do now is carve a little bit of time, because we didn't want this to be a one-way thing. We would love to learn from you, from each other. And so what we'd like to do is the following. Vasilina, if I could get the next slide. We would like for you to reflect on the 5 key findings that emerged from our evaluative study related to teacher presence, the importance of the instructor, personal connections between the instructor and the students, student to student, the role of whole group discussions in a course, but also small group collaborations, and finally, student agency. And what we'd like to do is give you 2 to 3 minutes to jot down some of these ideas that you have experienced yourself in your own practice as educators. And either just jot them down on a piece of paper and then you're going to share with us verbally, or you can actually post them to the chat as well. That would be fine too, because we'd really like to hear from you and engage with you and learn from each other. So we're going to be quiet for just 2-3 minutes and let you think about this. We're eager to hear your thoughts. Okay, and if you could start putting the finishing touches on your thoughts. And of course, as our colleagues jump in, you may even revise or think of some other things. Okay, and I see that we have one comment in the chat box. Would you like to share that with us verbally as well? So, thank you. Please do.
Tom, you're unmuted, so you can just talk away.
Am I on?
You are on.
You are. Sorry, I should have said.
Thank you, Barbara and Vasilina, for that. Very interesting. I was just, while you were talking, I was going back to the articles in the issue, and I was looking at my editorial that I wrote around those articles. And I remember highlighting the issue of teacher agency and learner agency, which Barbara, I think one of the points that I just caught while you were saying was teaching has become, you say teaching has become intentional and purposeful. And I think that's a critical point. Those of us who have been in this field of open, flexible distance learning will know that that was the thing, that was the hallmark of engaging in distance education, that for distance education, as we knew it 30 years ago, 40 years ago, forced teachers and learners to think about their role in teaching and learning a lot more than they would have otherwise done in a face-to-face setting. So much is taken for granted in face-to-face teaching. I'm going to ramble on for a little while because there's a bit of a context about this. All of us are, as I can see, old enough to know how education was in the 80s and the 90s in the tertiary education sector. You know, when I did my graduate education in Montreal a long time ago, some of the friends that I made by chance are still my friends today, 30 years after. And one of the best friends that I've got, you know, while you were talking, I just had a call from a guy from University of Auckland. You know, he and I went to undergraduate school a long time ago, 40 years ago in New Zealand. What I'm trying to say is that what I'm trying to get at is the difference between the role of teacher and learner agency in what we now call virtual learning environments and as it was in the traditional learning environments. The issue that worries me a lot is that we make a lot of song and dance about community of inquiry and community of practice in online learning environments. But I always ask the question cynically, you know, what's different? I mean, wasn't this the case in conventional practices? So why are we so animated about this in the online learning context? You know, an interesting research question is, research questions would be to see what the differences are, how community is formed in face-to-face, conventional, campus-based experiences, which are not going to go away, will be with us forever, but will change, and how teacher agency and learner agency manifest itself in virtual or online or blended learning environments. Now, I haven't seen a lot of interrogation of those differences, because that's an interesting question, don't you think so? I think so.
I do too. And I know what you're asking, you know, so what has changed? Why all of a sudden are we, you know, why is there a limelight on it, right? But clearly something has changed. And I think that students definitely are demanding more engagement. They're just not simply content to have education be a one-way street. They want to be part of that process as well. But I think what you were saying, Sam, is so true, is that we took a lot of things for granted in face-to-face that we cannot take for granted in online or distance. So Veselina, what might you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think for programs like ours, which is practice-based, and there are EDD programs that are entirely online, but our program being blended, for us, I think the issue of learner agency has been important, either in blended or online learning, because our students, as you know, are really advanced practitioners. They're really busy people. So we've always had this discussion in the program about balancing, having students who are balancing a lot of roles in their lives, and at the same time going to a really fast-paced program that asks them to develop a dissertation in practice using practice-based methods, and developing a study that will have implications almost immediately in their work. So I think for us, this learner agency has been important, and it is important to think about how we do this in online spaces, and how do we adapt or come up with this signature pedagogies that are still practice-based and really require immersing in the field, immersing in reality, and how to do that in online and virtual environments. So for me, I think this is where teaching presence or teacher agency becomes even more important, because we see students 5 times per semester. For the rest of the semester, for 4 or 5 months, we expect them to work on their dissertational practice. We expect them to balance all this. We expect them to exemplify agency. And these people run schools, they run districts, and so forth. So I think this is where I see the connection of building trust, supporting, and really supporting students in developing these projects so that they can do a rigorous work, they can do it on time. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think this is something that has been fascinating for me, how practice-based spaces are transferred, adapted, and constructed virtually.
Absolutely. And, to piggyback on what you just said about bringing balance and these working professionals who are also, going to school, I see that Sharon has posted about the importance of humanizing learning and bringing the human element into online classroom. Belonging needs to be purposefully designed into online environments, whereas in a face-to-face environment, it emerges more naturally because you're physically there. So how do we leverage the power of learner agency, particularly for students who are living complex and busy lives? And it is a luxury nowadays to have students who are in graduate school full-time. Most of our graduate students have a day job, of some description, especially in the education sector. And Sharon, could I invite you to say a little bit more about that? I think you've made such great points there.
Yes, thank you. I guess it's one of the things that we quite often, my role is a curriculum and learning designer, and I think it's one of the things that I see academic staff forgetting about, that humanizing aspect, and that, you talked about sharing, your experiences and those kinds of things, that makes a huge difference to students. And I think that also in terms of belonging, I've been doing, I'm currently doing a PhD around belonging, and what I find really interesting in the literature that I've been reading around the topic is how important it is, particularly for our students who might not fit what has been in the past the typical undergraduate profile of a school leaver coming into university. So students with disabilities in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, there's a whole range of low socioeconomic students that come into our universities and are not certain that do they belong in this space. So I think there's a lot that we can do with that. And I think that what I'm hoping to do, with the research that I'm doing, is looking at the high attrition rates that we do have in online. And is that because we are attracting students from these who can only access our higher education through online to these environments, and we need to make them feel more comfortable and more at home in the space, and that this is a space for them. And I think that perhaps we don't do enough in that particular space. And I was listening to Som earlier talk about his experience as an undergraduate student, and it's exactly the same for me. I've got 2 great friends that I've had since undergraduate, and we have a really strong connection, and have had children grow up and all of that. But then when I look at the experience from my own children's view, I had a son who nearly dropped out of university in the first year. He was, you know, he's white, his parents had been to university, he's wasn't required to work, he was living at home, he had everything going for him. And he just said to me, he said, Mum, I go onto a campus, he said, there's 50,000 other students and nobody knows my name. Nobody would even know if I was there. So, you know, having had that experience, it sort of made, it's, I guess, raised that for me as, you know, if that's his experience when universities were kind of designed for kids like him, what is it for other students? So I think that's a big part of that. And I think it's also that in the online environment that, you know, we are going to have, even in undergraduate, and we even see this because we've done some work, we're redesigning our science degree at the moment at my university. And, you know, I actually pulled together all the data around the course and attrition and things like that. And we've got attrition issues. But the thing that really shocked people is that 48% of our science students that start in first year of our degree, 48% are first in family. And that just blew people's minds that these students are coming in without that, I guess, cultural capital to support them as they transition into university. And also you know, we have students that are on average working 20 hours a week in addition to studying at an undergraduate level. And I know when I went to uni, you know, 5 days a week. I had a little part-time job that I did on Thursday nights and Saturday mornings, but that was all the work that I did. I didn't have to have caring responsibilities, which a lot of our students have to have today. So I think, you know, coming back to community of inquiry and things like belonging, I think it comes back to maybe there's a refocus on those because the nature of our students have changed. I don't know. I don't have the answers.
Well, I think all of those points that you made are you know, right on the money. And I saw that Antonina posted something about, you know, huge lectures of 400 or more, you know, other students. So even in those cases where it's face-to-face, it's very difficult, you know, to bring that sense of community when, you know, it's these huge, you know, lecture halls, right? But one of the things that we know about disclosure is that personal disclosure on the part of the instructor is that it's actually a two-pronged thing, because on the one hand, you do have to be purposeful, you do have to be intentional and think about those moments in the course that you can bring in some of those things. To give you an idea, Veselina does work with Roma people in Eastern Europe. And a lot of her research, you know, she's had wonderful success with her research, but of course we all know that even the most successful research is filled with different challenges along the way. So when we got to a point in the course where some of the students were expressing some of the challenges that they were having in conducting their pilot studies and doing their research, we made sure that we built in Veselina some opportunity for her to share her experience in conducting the Roma research. All of a sudden, Dr. Landreth, who seems so competent and knowledgeable and worldly, and she made herself human and shared with them some of the challenges and obstacles that she encountered and how she got over it. So being able to see that other side, right? And then in my case, so that's the first thing, is that you're intentional and purposeful. But then in my case, you also have to be open and flexible. And remember in the 1980s, if you were a teacher in the 1980s, you will remember this phrase, seizing the critical teaching moment. And so, and the idea was that sometimes you're in a classroom, somebody asks something or says something, and you stop and you make sure that you seize that moment to elucidate a point, right? So in our case, as Veselina was mentioning, in the fall of 2020, it was a very stressful time for a lot of people. And we sensed it in our students. And I had developed a workshop on how to avoid professional burnout. So, and there are tried and true strategies. And so I delivered the workshop, and at the very last minute, I decided to include some very personal information that I don't normally include, but it was so relevant to the time. And I'll share it with you all, because now I feel like we have a community ourselves. But I'm an ongoing cancer patient with stage 4 lymphoma. And the minute that the students were expressing everything that they were going through, I decided that I needed to open my heart, open my soul, and say, I understand. Let me share with you what I'm going through a little bit and tell you how I'm getting to the other side. And so they appreciated that. All of a sudden, we were all in there, on the same level, trying to learn together. So it's got to be both purposeful and intentional, but then it also has to be, flexible and open to your students' needs at that time. Antonina, did you want to say anything more about the comment that you posted? Great observation.
This is such a fascinating webinar, and I'm really thrilled to take part in it. I think that I do agree with the points that Sharon made about the humanizing and human element, and I shared about the fact that even though you might be attending a face-to-face class, the human element isn't always there, and I think it depends on the person doing the teaching and how they see themselves as teaching, and a lot of the times, not just in a face-to-face situation, I can be reading an article where I have no idea of the person behind the writing. This is what I liked about your article, that there was so much of the personal in it, and I think it's important. And another comment that I was going to make is about student agency. I do like all of your key findings, and I think they're very, very valuable. But the one that stood out for me is student agency. And this is a skill that isn't only useful during your study years, but I think it's also important in life generally and more broadly, that you don't sit back and wait for things to happen, that you are proactive rather than reactive, that you take initiative. And tying it back to the humanizing human element, if you're sitting in a classroom with 500, 400, even just 10 other people, and there's no human or humanizing element in it, that you do something to make it happen. And whether that's with your fellow students or you approach the lecturer and see if you can change things. And I think that's about all. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And we wanted to share the last slide and just say thank you in our native languages as well. I'm from Bulgaria. So it sounds like благодаря. And this slide has our email addresses in case you'd like to get in touch for if you have any questions or anything else. We really appreciated the invitation to spend some time with you today and share about our study. And we also learned a lot from your comments and this discussion. Thank you again for your opportunity to publish our paper and to meet you in person. Thank you.
Veselina and Barbara, thank you so very much for that. That was, it's a shame we don't have another half an hour or an hour to continue, because we were just getting hot, weren't we, on the trail of some really interesting ideas. I made myself some notes. I was going to pitch in. I'm sure others were too. But unfortunately, we do have to end it. The recording of this will be uploaded to the ODLAA YouTube channel. So you possibly didn't realize we've got one of those. And we'd like you to like, subscribe, and, ring that notification bell. Isn't that what I'm supposed to say? But here's the list. Here's the list to that channel. The other thing is, please, I encourage you to look out for the new upgraded version of the ODLAA website that should be launched in in early March, and Sharon's been doing a ton of work on getting that together. It'll be slick and beautiful. And finally, a reminder that Open Education Week is coming up. And that's on between the 7th and the 11th of March. And here's a link to the events, global events that have been organised for that week. We're all about supporting open education at ODLAA, so you might be interested in hooking into some of those events. And now I'll just say farewell. Thank you again, Barbara and Veselina. Much appreciated. Thank you, Robert and Antonina and Som and Sharon for joining us. Yes, many thanks. I'll see you at the next.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was great. Bye.
Bye-bye.